Welcome back to We Do the Heavy Lifting. I'm your host, Dr. Jenny Yentis, and today we do sports science. How is sports science different than exercise science? What does it mean? Is it only for athletics? We're going to learn all about those types of things today and actually even learn about how it's being used within NCAA collegiate institutions. So our guest today, really excited to have him here, is Howard Gray. And Howard, you are the Associate Athletics Director for Performance here at Texas A&M University. And as part of this position, you oversee performance nutrition, strength and conditioning, and sports science, which is one of the reasons we're here today. And also you play a really key role in on-campus collaborations, the other reason we're going to be talking about things today. So can you answer that question for us? What is sports science?
I'll give it a shot. It may not match exactly, some of my mentors. It may be hopefully a little shorter than some of my mentors' explanations. That's a bit of an inside joke for some people, but thank you for having me. It's an honor. I really appreciate what you're doing. But really, sports science explores some of the principles behind performance, and I think that's where one of the reasons where it is a bit different than exercise science, even though some of those scientific principles may be similar. We're really focusing on performance. We may get some health benefits and some wellness benefits from that too, but we ultimately want to, make our athletes, or I'm glad you mentioned, is it just for athletes at the beginning? Yeah. Other athletic populations, tactical athletes is certainly one that falls kind of into this as well, hopefully helping them perform. We are definitely not, there's elements of data science. And the Moneyball piece into it. There's certainly elements of that, and we're actually exploring that a little bit more and more as we go here at Texas A&M. But we really want to help people make informed decisions versus saying that it's data driven. There may be times when we tiptoe into that, but really we want to help eliminate blind spots. We're never going to eliminate all blind spots. But if we can kind of identify a few more things that are contributing to the performance or us not performing, we can then help the coach or the performance and wellness staff member make some decisions based on that. As far as the research side of sports science, I think focusing on athletic population, again, doesn't necessarily need to be an athlete or a Texas A&M athlete, but many groups could fall under an athletic population. And then it needs to be applicable, applied in the real world. I think you could maybe get away with one of those areas being present and not the other, but especially tentative. Sometimes you might have to do a study that does need general population just for the numbers or the people that are available, but we want it to be applicable, or vice versa. So that's an important piece. And then if you're a sports scientist, you'd service first. I did just mention research, and we hope that research comes along with providing service, but you have to focus on service first, and that's a huge part of actually being a sports scientist. You could be a sports science researcher potentially. Maybe you're not an actual sports scientist if you're actually not serving the teams or the athletes that you're focusing on.
So I want to ask a follow-up question. You had mentioned when you were first talking about it, trying to eliminate blind spots and making decisions for performance. It's a little general. Is there a specific example you could give to our listeners? Really,
really early on, and maybe getting ahead of myself, but oftentimes coaches have a really good feel for what they're doing, especially experienced coaches at a high level like we have here. So they may know most of the time, or a very high percentage of the time, what they're putting their athletes through, but there may be some times when they're off. Using the eye and experience test may be slightly off. So if we can put some numbers and some metrics, we can help them be confident when they are right, but then also, hey, let's have a conversation when we're maybe a little bit off. So that's a big part where kind of the GPS tracking, which is oftentimes one of the first things that comes to mind when you bring up sports science. That's a clear example there. Working with a seasoned American football coach or a seasoned soccer coach, again, most of the time they've done it many seasons. It's not their first preseason or their first game week. But there are times when they may be a little bit off or something's impacting the players that they can't explain. And that's really where sports science can come and help and be like, hey, you thought that you were this was the big grind day. It actually wasn't. It was lower volume or intensity than you anticipate, and the players are actually reflecting that with, say, some of their subjective feedback. Not saying you need to go change the plan immediately, but let's at least learn from that and plan better. It's certainly not always about doing less. The example I used there was sometimes hey, let's do more, be more demanding when the time is right.
Yeah.
Versus always trying to put the restrictor on our athletes or our coaches. That certainly puts sports science in a bad crowd.
No, absolutely. I think that it's important for people to realize that, there's times that more is needed or less is needed, and to have that expertise available to kind of give you the information that, like you said, you didn't want to become too data driven, but typically you all have some data to support what you're doing or research. So it's not just you're feeling it out either.
Yeah, exactly. Otherwise you have just more opinions, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you've been with Texas A&M since 2014, and I'm sure you've seen a lot of trends in sports science come and go. So in addition to these trends, NCAA institutions tend to have a wide variety of sports. So you have trends in sports science, but then you have a lot of sports you're dealing with. So what are the top things that you think of that are needed to establish a really strong sports science program?
Sure. I'm going to approach this principles that should work for most situations, because sports science could start or pick up momentum within the athletic stuff, or it could also be, our partners in academics or some outside people that are kind of like, hey, trying to get in there and driving sports science initiatives forward. So I wanted to share a couple that could work or should work for most, but being respectful early on is probably number one for me. Performance and wellness staff and coaches have been practicing sports science for a long, long time. Yes, sports science as its own kind of identifiable unit or department at institutions like A&M is fairly new, but it's been going on in NCAA collegiate athletics for a long, long time. It's certainly been going on for a long time across the world in international sport. So you have to be respectful of that, alongside being respectful of the experience and then the coach's eye that all of our coaches certainly have, and most high-level institutions have. I would say, once you come in with respect, is try to maximize a return on investment of what's being done currently. Institutions like this and people that are watching, I'm sure that there has already been a financial commitment to various pieces of technology. Some of those pieces of technology may be good, some may be not so good, but I would say, hey, identify what's being done, help people identify what's being done, and then help maximize that. So that's, again, trying to get that return on investment. The people in the business office will really like that. The administrators will really like that. You're not immediately trying to spend money. You're trying to get a better return on what's already been spent. Following that, sure, if there are some clearly inaccurate pieces of technology or things that are just not valid for what they're being used, or they're just old and malfunctioning, then yes, identifying that and sharing a very well research recommendation would follow that up. I would say focusing on human resources, investment in human resources does trump technology, because especially at a place like this, you're going to have some of the technology already here. Sometimes you get things given to you. Sometimes academic people are at least trying stuff with athletics. So we need the people to make best use of it. And the last thing you want is to actually send you in the other direction and becoming a distraction, and taking a coach away from some practices that actually have been working for him or her. That's certainly something to be mindful of. Relationships too. So even if you're at a place where you can't pour money into human resources and hire a ton of people, spending that time on your feet, having coffee, having a beer, attending some meetings, volunteering for other duties, service duties with your partners on campus is very, very worthwhile. That's going to also help you unearth expertise on campus that you might not know is there. And then I think keeping an eye on sustainability. Part of that is just being financially responsible. If you have an athletics director or one, boss that's super keen on this and they're like, yes, you can spend that money, but then they go on for another job, there's a chance that it may not be sustainable that way. But also looking forward for what's going to give us the biggest return on investment or bang for our buck in 5-10 years. And that's certainly the approach we've taken here. I'll share a bit more about that later, but with investments in people that have one foot in academics and one foot in the athletics department has been our approach. Again, share a little bit more later, but keeping that in mind as you start to navigate maybe the first couple of years with sports science at your institution.
I do appreciate the comment you made about being financially responsible, returns on investment. I think there's this stereotype, I guess, that college athletics, certain universities in particular, it's just you're like Uncle Scrooge, just rolling in the money.
Yep.
You know, you just have a pile of it, and you all just go swimming in it every day. So it's not how it is, and
For
so
sure.
keeping that in mind, and that money may not be coming from state taxpayer dollars, but it's still usually donated or
Sure.
gotten through games, and so you want to be responsible with what you're doing.
Yeah,
with
that money's being earned by someone, right? And it's the right thing to do, regardless if we were talking about sports science or marketing or whoever,
Yeah.
right? I'd be saying the same thing. But it especially helps an emerging field. Again, sports science has been going on for a long, long time, but now that we're starting to see units pop up or dedicated staff members, the last thing you want to do is just be negligent with it.
Absolutely.
Because, with, like I said, with transitions and other changes that are going to happen at this level or the pro level, you're putting yourself at risk. And you need time for sports science to really make an impact. Oftentimes it's a slow burner.
Yeah, it's not something that's immediate. I mean, maybe there might be, those probably come every once in a while that you see something, you can make the change immediately. It makes them, but yeah. So how have you been able to successfully incorporate or integrate sports science into that fabric of Texas A&M athletics?
Sure. We have not rushed. I've been very, very lucky, and I've had great bosses. I've had more than two bosses, but I certainly would share Coach Sumlin's name here, and then Justin Moore's as well. I'm very, very patient, having vision, but realizing that things aren't going to happen overnight. So that helps. We've had great partners to our left and our right in performance and wellness as well. But essentially, there are times when, yes, we are the people that are driving innovation. The application of, say, some new technology that we have invested on, absolutely, that's going to be us that are going to be the flag bearers for that. But a lot of the time, we are assistants or helpers for other staff members that are already here and helping maximize their role. So that's the athletic trainers of the world, the strength and conditioning coaches of the world, the dietitians of the world, sports psych for sure as well, but, primarily the first three. So that is being a focus of ours. We're not kind of trying to be the people up at the front, on the sideline being seen. It comes back to the respect piece. And those units have always done a good job here, but we're talking about the finding a couple more percent. I mentioned earlier investing in staff members that are in both the academic world and athletics. So that's one of our more recent, we've been talking about it for a long, long time, but it wasn't until 2021 following, really challenging year for all of us with COVID. We were able to bring our first PhD fellowship fellow here, Madison Treese. So she and Drew Smith, who followed up last year, they are PhD students. They are funded through athletics. They serve sports teams and performance and wellness units, but they are also learning from people like yourself, faculty, doing research with faculty. So we feel like that can help bring both sides along. We were already collaborating before we did that, but we can't not collaborate when you have staff members with one foot in both areas. And it really helps us operate in the gray. We want to operate in the gray in a good way between the various areas on campus, and we want to operate in the gray in some regards within performance and wellness. Some problems or questions or roles that it's not clear who it falls upon. It's oftentimes that we can really get our teeth into that and explore that. It might not be our role for forever, but we can certainly help point people in the right direction.
Sounds like a lot of that work that you've been doing is mainly just, like you said, kind of sitting in the background, listening, and then figuring out, just kind of listening to maybe what the problems are or hearing what complaints are, barriers are, and then providing those solutions.
Helping answer questions that maybe haven't been answered before. If there are times when, we maybe can't. But if we can answer 4 of the 6 questions, then we've got way less unknowns, right? And we can be a little bit more certain in our path, or we can go connect with you and find someone else on campus that maybe can help answer those questions. So if we're not connecting with you and our PhD students aren't connecting with you and your colleagues, it might take 6 months to find that person on this huge campus that can help us. Now we hope it takes, 6 weeks, 6 days, 6 hours, or whatever it ends up being.
One side question, the program that you have with your PhD students, is that a common program that you have in sports science, do you see that across other institutions?
It's becoming more common. We haven't shouted it from the rooftops, but I do think some people have noticed, and I certainly laying the groundwork for it to be happening soon. I think you see it more the other direction, where the PhD students are funded by the academic programs and then almost offered in a way, or collaborated with the athletics department. So we've kind of got it the other way, and our financial model will be ever evolving. As we get interest from vendors and interested parties and donors and things like that, and people in academics. I don't think we're tied that it always has to be from us. We certainly want to always have some skin in the game from a financial standpoint, because that shows we're serious about it to everyone. Coaches, our athletes, our partners, you all in Huffines and everything like that. It's funny because in many regards, we in performance and wellness, so when we're talking about kind of what we call all 5 units of performance and wellness, we absolutely should learn from the pro model, whether it's European, Australian, American pro model, in many of our regards. I'd say sports science is one where I think NCAA institutions should maybe, yes, learn some things from those clubs, those teams, but also not be copy. Don't copy and paste, because certainly in the US with players' unions and various other restrictions and just culture, having shared PhD fellows is actually really, really hard to do. Research is really, really hard to do at the professional level of any kind. There's all kinds of restrictions. We have restrictions and red tape here as well, and we should, rightfully so, at A&M, but less so than potentially the pro model. So that's, you asked, is this common? I think it would be more common if the pros were doing it with the PhD model, but they're not doing it because they don't think it's a good idea. There are oftentimes barriers. I did see a couple of postings earlier this year. One was in professional soccer. I think Washington Spirit, the Washington Spirit, are really thinking outside the box and offered a PhD fellowship. That's probably one of the only 2 that I've seen in the professional sport in the US, and that doesn't mean that they haven't happened. I just haven't seen them. So again, learn from the pros, but hey, we're a unique environment here. In collegiate sport, there are some things that we can do that they wish they could do.
Fair enough. Yeah. And I think for the students, the program in and of itself is, there's only so many academic positions. There's only so many faculty positions. And if we keep training PhD students at the rate we are, we're going to have more students, more graduates than we do jobs. And so this model really gives them that experience to be able to go out, as opposed to a PhD student that's only worked in a lab and has never had that applied science or that applied side, or working with a coach, or working. So it really, you are setting those individuals up for success.
Appreciate that. We think in a future sports science role, it's going to be very, very helpful for them. But it may be that they do then tilt back towards academics, either year 1 or 31 years, and they're going to be very, very good mentors for the next round.
Yeah, absolutely. So you've mentioned a little bit about performance and wellness. So how does sports science really fit into that overall performance and wellness of an athlete? Sure.
And I think I kind of half answered it before, in that, actually, to quote my colleague Scott, we can become the ultimate assistants. So each of those more well-established performance and wellness staff can potentially operate at a higher level, or certainly more informed than if we weren't around. Already highly qualified and experienced, but hey, that extra level of detail or less unknowns help them with their decision making. So I think that comes to mind, as well as having the creative thought. Yes, we may get seen as kind of numbers geeks or physiology geeks or biomechanics geeks or whatever, but we actually should be able to operate with a little bit more creativity, to think outside the box, investigate new forms of new techniques, new training methods, new technology. The people that are a bit more entrenched in the day-to-day, that have always had certain roles and it's kind of a set work day, set work week, can do. So I would say that would be the other piece. We're still establishing ourselves with some sports. I would say that we impact the vast majority, or far more than we don't, here at Texas A&M, but we are still establishing ourselves, and that's. I've been on campus since 2014. I've worked with football only for 4 years. So now 5 years with Olympic sports, the rest of the department, and we are still establishing ourselves. So it absolutely takes time.
So I think you've mentioned it a little bit, but specifically, where do you see sports science headed in terms of collegiate programs?
I'm obviously biased. I think the model that we've got, it can't be 100% lent on PhD students, and it's no knock on the PhD students, but they do tend to be a little younger and less experienced. We do have some, non-traditional students that are, could be in the mix too, that might help with that. But a level of investment in full-time staff complemented by, dual kind of in both areas. And it could be that they're a master's, graduate assistant. They don't necessarily need to be at the PhD level. And then, tapping into the resources that are on campus with faculty. Yeah. And those last two are actually kind of really tied together. I feel like one without the other, it's going to be, quite a bit weaker than both. And it is challenging at institutions of this size that are Research One institutions because there isn't a lot of funding in what we do. So faculty that are, at least have interest in our area may need to be creative with regards to finding funding, or we have some strong leadership from kind of the leadership within the academic departments to see that applied faculty or applied researchers have value. It may not be as much of a dollar value, but it has a big impact. And you'll hear my boss's boss, the athletics director, talk about athletics being the front porch of the university. So collaborating with the front porch, or playing a little bit and showing off on the front porch of the university can help in a long-winded way with academic departments that maybe don't get seen as often.
Absolutely, and I appreciate that, because usually universities are known by their sports teams.
Sure.
A lot of times they're not known for some of their academic programs, even though those academic programs are outstanding. Yep. I mean, A&M right now, we have, out of the U.S., a rating just came out, we're 9th, which I think is, out of all the kinesiology programs in the United States, that's a great thing to hang your hat on. And I don't think people really realize that because it's not as visible. Yeah.
It's amazing. You see a feature on someone that's working with a high profile sport, and it's, this PhD student's mentioned, and then, they're doing this degree. And then all of a sudden someone finds themselves on another area of kinesiology. Yeah. Maybe they don't become a sports science undergrad but they see another area within kinesiology and sport management, for example, and attendance goes up, or you get some extra funding because of that. Because that person's dad sees it and they own an oil company, just obviously.
Yeah. I mean, and you kind of mentioning that, like, we're sort of talking about it a little bit about how that academics and athletics can go together. And many of our listeners are students. Sure. And from my experience, a good number of them want to work in sports or work in athletics. It's an outstanding number of them that do. So kind of a two-part question here is, one, what do academic programs need to be doing to ensure that we're preparing them? But on the flip side, what do students need to be doing to ensure that they're employable at the end of their program?
Yeah. From the academic program's perspective, start with the respect piece that I shared earlier. For sure, that goes for anyone that is looking to kind of go down this path. And then I did also mention, valuing the impact of research that may not be a high dollar value. So that's huge for me. Who are these students going to be learning from? Yes, learning the basic science. Learning a lot of about exercise science will be a great foundation for following up with sports science. But if they don't have any faculty that have ever operated in that space, it's always going to be a reach. Doesn't mean that it can't still be a good program, but it is going to be a bit of a reach. There's going to be a leap of faith there somewhere, right? Focusing more on the students, and this is kind of like, it's maybe a cop out, but if obviously volunteering or doing internships, sometimes volunteering isn't even possible. You have to have some kind of credit, right, or pay to make it happen legally. But certainly, obviously, offering to help anyone if there is someone from a sports science standpoint, or someone in strength and conditioning that has a kind of a sports science edge. I mean, there's many of those, or dietitians or other people in performance and wellness that are most interested. Potentially could help with a more well-defined project. It's doubtful that an undergrad, a junior or senior undergrad, is going to be able to come in and act as if they're a full-time sports scientists, with a collegiate program for one semester and then be gone. It's doubtful that's going to happen, but maybe there is one thing that could be deeply researched, or data collection could be done a little bit more strict, just some stuff that's already happening, but just tightening up the protocols a little bit. That could be a way in. But really the most important thing, I think, is, that base education has to be good, obviously excelling at their classes, whether they're sports science classes or exercise science classes or some that are even less specific. But getting exposure to how athletic teams operate is huge. That's probably the thing that's the hardest to teach. If someone, has watched sport, that's great. They got to love sport. That's a price of admission. But if they've gone through their academic program without ever having, seen how things operate when things are going well, and then when things are not going so well, how you speak to a coach or a head coach when you're on a 7-game win streak versus a 7-game lose streak is very, very different. So there's a gap there. How are you going to get that experience? But there are opportunities to be a manager, to be a manager or working in athletic training or nutrition where they're just more logistics based. Yes, you're not maybe operating as a sports scientist, but you're seeing, you're observing. How does that high level, how does Dan Jacoby operate around, Jimbo at certain times, when it's hot and things aren't going well? Like that experience is so valuable. Yeah. So I think encouraging people to think outside the box. There's positions in video and creative. I know that may be a little bit further away from sports science, but they have more student positions than we would ever have in sports science. So it means that you could maybe get that exposure. And if nothing else, you can kind of, hey, I'm going to watch that sports scientist or that strength conditioning coach over there. Is that something I really want to do? Yeah. And if it's not, then that's fine. You've avoided maybe wasting 2, 3, 4 years of whatever that next step would be.
Yes, absolutely. I think that's so important, is the shadowing or even just seeing it. So many of our students, if they don't want to work in athletics, they want to become physical therapists. And a lot of them don't really know what that job entails, working with human beings. And you have to have a certain personality to be able to work with, people that are hurt and, need want quick fixes sometimes. So
we just had a perfect example, without naming names, but someone that just helped us with the meeting that we were in earlier today that had to hustle at the last minute to get out some adjusted material for us to have a productive meeting. Yes. I know that person has spent plenty of time in an athletics world as a student manager, and she did not seem flustered at all, and she got the job done. So I won't name names, but definitely a shout out to her. If she's viewing this, she knows who she is. Yeah,
it's that hands-on experience is something that you cannot get it in a classroom. You just can't, no matter how much you're told it, until you're sitting there and you're having to have those conversations, or you're actually seeing how a budget is being drafted and then cut. The textbook does not talk about those things. So, well, Howard, thank you so much for being here today. I really appreciate it, and I'm sure our listeners have really appreciated all the information you've brought to us. Is there anything else that you'd like to share with our listeners? We always give our guests an opportunity.
Thank you for the opportunity. I think I went on enough tangents already to probably have that covered. But I will say we're very much, wanting to get work done behind the scenes, maybe not intentionally hiding, but just certainly when we don't want to be up front and center. And we probably here at A&M in sports science haven't done a good job of sharing some of our successes and our failures and sharing that story. So that's something that we are actively working on. So I'd encourage listeners or viewers to kind of check back in on our website, A&M's website. You'll start to see a little bit more sports science content and sections coming in the coming months. Yeah. And we hope that helps, guide people in those first couple of steps a little bit. Yeah. Again, we definitely don't have it all figured out. It's been a process, but we want to share a little bit more about that, because we are very, very proud of our progress and what the projection looks like. Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you. And for those of our listeners that maybe want to learn more about the opportunities that Texas A&M Athletics has available, please email us at huffinesinstitute@tamu.edu, and we will help you figure out where to go, what the right person is, who that would be, that kind of thing, so that you're not overwhelming Howard's email. That is helpful, and that's actually being that conduit. If we were to answer one of the questions again, as far as what can faculty do, being a conduit like you just shared is incredibly helpful. Thank you. Thank you. And thank you to our listeners again for joining us for another episode of We Do the Heavy Lifting. As always, if there's a topic or subject matter or person that you would like us to chat with in the episode, just give us an email at huffinesinstitute@tamu.edu. Until next time, thanks. Thank you.
We Do the Heavy Lifting would like to send thanks to Dr. Jenna Yentes, our host, this week's guest, Howard Gray, Tex Aggs for a recording studio, Anisha Patel as executive producer, and Dell Billings for opening and closing credits.